Here we are, and it is a pleasure to be here on Live Talk with Becky Chernek with Tom Kline, Better Vantage Point. It is certainly a pleasure again to have you on with us tonight, with me tonight, with us tonight. And before we get started, for those guys that are new to this channel, I have been providing the very best of finance and insurance training for automotive dealers, for well over 30 years, and really helping dealers to get it together, right? To bring the entire team together to really help to maximize profits. And so I go from online to BDC to working with the desk to working with the salespeople to working with the F&I people to really help to maximize those profits. And the idea is to stick and get those customers coming back time and time again. I know Tom Kline from being in the industry and from being from Maryland, Baltimore. So, Tom, welcome again. Thank you so much for being here. Talk to our dealers first about your background and how many years in the automotive industry, your dealerships,
Sure.
if you will, before we get started, and what you're doing today.
First, it's great to be hosted by Wonder Woman, so I really appreciate that. I'm honored to be here with Wonder Woman and with you, and both
Thank
of
you.
you.
I just get a kick out of that Wonder Woman. I'm thinking, man, I certainly am Wonder Woman. I have been in many, many dealerships throughout the USA. So it's like, I'm it. Thank
That's
you.
it. I have been in the car business myself 30 odd years. My family started in the car business in 1925. So we've been nearly 100 years. I'm a third generation car guy and former dealership owner for 30 years. And we sold our stores in 2019. And then I opened my consulting business then. And I help dealers make sure that they keep the money they make. So I find the holes or the places at the dealership that they may either be losing money and not know it, or potentially lose money and not know it. We talk about insurance, and we talk about compliance, and we talk about dispute resolution. Kind of those are what I call the three legs of the stool, which is how can you transfer risk to a third party, whether that's an insurance company or putting your own policies in place. How to make sure that you stop problems before they happen, and how to make sure that the regulators and the lawyers don't get you on compliance. So that's what I do.
Well, that's a very important position to be in, especially I'm sure that you've had some of that you've had to deal with over the years in your own dealerships.
Yes.
And right. So you've had to mitigate some of that.
Regulators and lawyers. I know them well. I know them very, very well.
That's what I was thinking. So where were your dealerships located?
In Virginia. So we had them in and around the Hampton Roads area or the Tidewater area, which includes Virginia Beach and Hampton. Okay. We also have had dealerships in the past in North Carolina, but I wasn't old enough to be part of that. So
you've seen a lot of changes in our industry. Would that be fair to say?
Well, in 1925, my grandfather told me that they used to take the cars off of the trains and assemble the body and the chassis, take them off in pieces. They used to assemble them next to the railroad tracks. Now, I don't know if that's true because I've never looked it up, but it sounds plausible to me.
Well, I would imagine they're probably not fibbing and telling you the way it is. And so that being said, I really wanted to get into this conversation about arbitration agreements. And is some might say, Becky, don't you have something a little bit more interesting to talk about than these arbitration agreements, for crying out loud? We do them all the time. That's what we do. And so when you and I had the conversation about arbitration agreements, you're like, well, I know it's standard practice that we get our F&I make sure that customer is signing a arbitration agreement, but it may not necessarily be the I don't know. It may not necessarily be the right thing to do. So
Right.
could you kind of, let's get right into it.
Sure.
Why? Why do you say that?
So first thing is that some banks will require the arbitration agreement, but that can be negotiated through, in my experience, once you kind of unbox the whole thing and explain why. I know Bank of America actually is one of the banks that does not want the arbitration agreement. And I found that out from a dealer last week, actually 2 dealers last week. So here's the thing. So in the car business, you've already got a target on your back. So it's not like you want to go to court. Going to court is going to cost you money. And even if the law is on your side, oftentimes it doesn't matter. The judge is going to rule against you. So having an argument with a customer just probably doesn't pay. And so it's better to try to resolve the problem with the customer. Now, the first thing I get told by dealers is, I didn't do anything wrong. It's the first thing they say is, well, they bought it as is. We don't need to give them tires. We don't need to. All that could be true. All that could be true. However, as I like to say, we're running businesses. We're not running nonprofit organizations. So as a business, you have to make business decisions. And it really doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. Fix the customer problem. Because eventually, customer problems are all like rotten fish, in my opinion. They always just smell worse as time goes on. So there's no reason to push them aside or push them off or have somebody else fix it or tell the customer you're not going to help them because they signed these 9 pieces of paper. And all that is old thinking, in my opinion. So, but if you're not going to do that, if you're not going to fix the customer problem and you're going to rely on an arbitration agreement, here's a good reason why that doesn't help. So you've got a problem with a customer and you're going to try to resolve it. So you're really asking the customer to pay, and it ranges depending on the arbitration agreement, but to pay between $500 and $2,500 because they're responsible for their half of the fees, right, Becky? You're always taught that the customer's responsible for half.
I always thought so. I mean, that's what we talked about. We talked about that the customer had a fair share of that, but it would go into arbitration. So that meant it would reduce the costs to settle the case out of court.
Okay, so here's why that's exactly the opposite. Is because now you're asking the customer to come up with money to then have an opportunity to sit down and talk to you, which is completely illogical if you think about it. Now, a lot of dealers I know will say, well, that'll keep them from bringing up the problem in the first place. I would answer, no, it doesn't, because they can go get a lawyer on a contingency for free anyway, which oftentimes they do. The lawyers then front the money for the arbitration, which happens often. And then instead of trying to settle with one person, now you're trying to settle with 2. And the customer has to be satisfied in that case when the lawyer gets involved. But now you've got a lawyer that's controlling the situation. So, and they're getting paid somewhere between 30 and 40% contingency. So you've just increased the amount of money that you're going to have to pay to settle it, when you could have just settled it to begin with. And if you're trying to build trust to try to get the customer to pay, making the customer pay $500 to $2,500 doesn't make any difference anyway.
Because what happens if as a customer, I don't have $2,500 to go ahead and try to settle up? I've got a problem with my engine. I got a problem with the, whatever that you sold me. And I feel like, you took me to the cleaners. And so I certainly don't have $2,500 to split between you and me. And so now the problem begins. And now we have a customer who's blowing up.
So what are they going to do, Becky? They're blowing up. So they don't have the money for arbitration,
I don't
and
have
they
the
don't
money
have.
for $2,500 for arbitration. No.
Okay, so what are they going to do? They've got a car. They've got 70 months left to pay. So what are they going to do? Give me 2 examples of what they could do.
Well, I'm going to tell
Otherwise-
the lender, I'm going to go call the freaking lender up and I'm going to go, the dealer didn't take care of me. So you know what? You can have this freaking car back because I'm not paying.
So the lender sometimes calls,
And
right?
hopefully mitigates it and says, you know,
Right.
and meanwhile the dealer goes, go pound sand.
Right? Or they start trashing you on the internet.
Oh yeah, social media. Of course I'm going to. Of course I'm going to. This
So
dealer is, you know, the pits.
that's right. So we know 95% of the people who buy a car read dealer reviews before they buy a car. So you don't want to read on the internet that whether the customer's right or wrong. And some dealers say, well, people can read between the lines. They don't want to read between the lines. They just see that this person got screwed and they don't care. So they trash you on the internet. Then, if they're energetic, they'll go to a politician. The politician will go to the motor vehicle dealer board. I've seen that happen before. Motor vehicle dealer board gets involved. And then you've got potentially a politician who has to be satisfied.
Oh, we know what that's all about.
And sometimes they go to the AG's office. I've seen that happen
Ooh.
before on
Ooh,
plenty of
totally.
Sometimes the AG's office does a good job and sometimes they don't.
So why are dealers, you know, I will say this, and I apologize. I know, here's the thing. I know that you've come in, you know, because you're working, you're on the road, you're in dealerships all over the country. And I'm going to tell you right now, guys, I asked Tom's like, Becky, I'm all over the road. You know, I'm in a hotel environment. I'm like, come on anyway. It doesn't matter. I want you. But I will tell you, you are cracking up a bit on here. So, you know what I would try to do if I were you? Come do me a favor, try to go back out, come back in. Go, you don't have to close out on your computer, but what I would do is ask you to come back, go back out, and come back in. And
Right.
and I'll be here for you. And
Right.
yeah. So I just want to make sure, guys, that you know we get to hear Tom Kline, and he's going to talk about all the things and the reasons why, you know, we don't want to necessarily, why arbitrations may not necessarily be the right way to go. So here we go. And hopefully you get to hear Tom. I was hearing some cracking up, so I really wanted to make sure that you heard Tom Kline. Here he's back.
Am I back?
Tom. You're back. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
back.
Okay. Perfect.
Good. Apologies. The internet in Houston must be slow. They haven't fed the hamsters today.
I just knew you were cracking up, and I don't know why, because we tested everything and it's like, and then the minute we got on, it just seemed like it was cracking up. So I really wanted people to hear you and what you had to say about. So why do you think dealers are buying into arbitration? Every single deal, I have a customer sign a separate arbitration agreement with the dealership, and of course, you have an arbitration agreement in the law contract.
Right. I don't know why. Maybe they've never thought of it. I mean, here's what I advocate. And actually, many years ago, this is what we did. And many years ago, the Wall Street Journal called to interview me on this. And what we did is we had a clause in our agreement that the customer, if they were upset, was required to come see me to try to have them work it out before they'd go to a regulator or before they'd go to a lawyer. So at least we had an opportunity to try to fix the problem before it became a bigger problem.
So let me ask you a question, Tom. I thought I mean, maybe we're talking about two different things here, but I thought that was the arbitration agreement that you're saying to the customer, look, when you sign this, this is what you're signing, and you're agreeing to the fact that you're going to let us try to work this out before you go to an arbitration or going to an arbitrator. Isn't that the general way these work?
No. So when you go to an arbitrator, then you're letting a third party decide whatever's going to happen. That's what arbitration is.
Well, right. Well, what I'm saying is, in that agreement, you're saying to the customer, okay, let us try to arbitrate this. No, wrong word. Sorry. Let us try to come to terms with this and correct the problem. And if in the event we have to go to arbitration, then we're going to arbitration. But that is the whole idea, is to reduce the cost of doing that.
I guess you could use the umbrella term as mediation for what I'm talking about. But
Sure.
mediation is just, can we please try to work this out? When you involve arbitration, all the agreements say the American Arbitration Association, which is, I think, what's on the law contract, and you then have to pay the person to arbitrate, and both sides get to present their side of the story, and the arbitrator is going to split the difference anyway. That's what arbitration is nobody's nobody's going to be particularly happy with the result. But meanwhile, you drag the customer through the mud, try to make them pay, or have them pay, so that the arbitration moves forward. And I've seen it used both ways. I've seen lawyers who use the arbitration process. I recently had a dealer call me and say, hey, I just got this thing where I missed the arbitration, which I don't believe they missed it. I believe they just threw it in the garbage can and said, I don't care. But they called me and they said, well, what do I do now? Because there was a lawyer involved and they were going to court because they missed the arbitration deadline.
So would you say that the arbitration agreement is something that, why would a dealer do it? Why would a dealer have an arbitration agreement? Why would they rethink the idea behind having one?
The only reason I can think of that they have it is because the banks mandate it. And if you've got a bank that mandates it, then as opposed to calling them and saying, hey, this could be a problem, can we not work around this, and here's why, they just say, screw it, I got bigger fish to fry, and off they go. It's just not high on the agenda. But if you have a really upset customer, when those customers take you to court, or try to take you to court, or they send them, the lawyer files a motion to set aside the arbitration and go to court, which happens a lot also, then you have to go argue as to why it should be an arbitration instead of being in court. I mean, you're just wasting time, you're wasting money, you're irritating the customer, you're pushing a barrier between the two of you. It's going to be harder for you to try to resolve that because you're burning up whatever trust is left, if there is any trust. And in order
I guess I don't mean to cut you off, Tom. I guess I'm confused. And
Okay.
I'm speaking on behalf of a lot of F&I people in this country, because I am telling you, there are separate agreements that a dealer is signing, that he gets the customer to sign an arbitration agreement.
Right.
They are signing it. Now, I do understand that there is a arbitration agreement through the lender, which is identified on the law contract.
Right.
One is different than the other.
I hear you.
That would be a requirement of the lender. But the
I hear you.
dealer is also asking the customer to sign an arbitration agreement. So it's like, it's not the requirement of the lender so much. It's the fact that that's what they do. They get this arbitration agreement form, and I'm telling you, a lot of dealers, I'm not saying every dealer, because obviously I've been in every dealership across the country. But there are a lot of dealers out there that are, that are having customers sign that agreement on their behalf.
Maybe they haven't.
Sandy Parks is an F&I person, director from big stores in Kentucky.
Right.
She has a separate arbitration agreement.
Maybe, and Sandy, you can maybe answer this. Has this issue ever been visited with your dealer principal or your general manager about why those are signed? I mean, as we know, a lot of things end up being legacies, and you ask the question, well, why is this like this? And the answer is what, Becky? It's because it's always been that way, right?
Been
That's
that
all,
way.
and that's the only answer, and nobody else has a separate answer for that. But I think it's
Because I think it's something that has been trained to dealers, and I'm not going to say who and what by what attorney off it or the other, but it's been something that's been said. If you put or a arbitration agreement, it's going to protect the dealer and the customer from high cost to litigate a problem. And let's see what Sandy says. Most dealers in Kentucky get a separate arbitration agreement signed. They all do. And then you have the law contract that also has some lenders, not all, who have the arbitration agreement in the contract.
I think there's a better way. I mean, my experience is I've spent $80,000 in a month litigating. 1 month. What sense does that make? Why? I mean, why do that? Now, someone's going to argue, well, okay, if you arbitrate, then you don't have those large attorney fees. Well, that's not true because you're going to hire a lawyer to go arbitrate. I mean, however much that takes, that's going to. But in the meantime, you could spend the money getting the customer problem fixed instead of doing this giant circle of no results, upsetting everybody, pulling your focus away from selling cars and what you should be doing, right? You take the plow out of the field, and when you take the plow out of the field, you end up not having good months. So it's this giant distraction that happens. And I would proffer. Sandy says we were told that it costs them less and prevents them going to court most of the time. It depends on the lawyer, Sandy. In Virginia, as an example, I know all the plaintiff lawyers who specialize in suing car dealers. And there are plenty of plaintiff lawyers in every state that just sue car dealers. They have a practice about how to get around arbitration. And then you're arguing in court about why the arbitration should or shouldn't be enforced. And then there's federal laws about this, and there's state laws, and there's a lot of nuance. I'm not a lawyer, but there's a lot of nuance to the state and federal laws about whether it's enforceable and why it's enforceable and which part of the deal is enforceable. And there's a lot of nuance to it. I mean, we're talking in generalities, but I don't think it ultimately costs less. I don't think it helps resolve the problem ultimately, and I think the resolutions end up splitting the baby anyway. So you don't get, there's not a lot of benefit, and I don't see the attorney's fees being reduced. I mean, if you think about it, think about all the insurance companies who have to respond to these things. The insurance companies don't tell you you should use arbitration. I talk in part of my practice is talking to all the insurance companies and know what they think. And I haven't ever heard an insurance company say, oh, we love arbitration, right? Because they'd rather have their adjuster get in there, adjust the claim, fix it, and move on. Because the longer that the adjuster has to deal with it, the more money the insurance company has to pay to the adjuster. And I agree, Sandy, most of the time the dealer should try to help the customer because it costs less and it's the right thing to do, and it's good for business. And if the customer has posted on the internet and said, I don't like these people, my car's broken or whatever, you ask them after you fix their problem, you ask them to go on the internet and to update their review so that everyone can see that there was a problem and you fixed it, right? Which is all consumers want to begin with. They want to see if the business is going to fix a problem, then they're more likely to do business with that business because they read the reviews and fixed the problems. I don't think anybody believes that when you go through and you only see good reviews on whether it's a dealership or on Google or Amazon or any place that has these reviews, I don't think anybody believes them if it's all just good. What do you think?
I think, so when we talked about this and you were talking to me about it's really not in the best interest of the customer, these arbitration agreements. because the likelihood the customer is going to have to pay towards that arbitration, the likelihood of them being more upset than satisfied.
Right, right. I mean, what sense does that? I mean, if you think about it, you want to try to coalesce around a resolution, right? So, in order to coalesce around a resolution, we'd like you to pay money so that we can coalesce around a resolution. What sense does that make?
Well, it doesn't, especially if it's frustrating the customer even more so in that they've got to come out of pocket with the customer has to come out of pocket,
Right.
with that additional money to satisfy or to even arbitrate the case. So let's see what some of these other comments are.
While,
Vince Bailey says, until you get sued. Hey, Vince, good to see you tonight.
and if you
And
get
then,
sued, Vince, if you get sued, my policy was I always went and met with the attorney and tried to resolve it with him. Don't want to argue with you. Don't think you're necessarily right on these 23 points. Let's talk about each of the 23 points, but let's try to get this resolved. And sometimes you get your insurance company involved in those, and sometimes you're self-insuring. I'll use an example, Becky.
so are you saying that it's not, so an arbitration agreement, the reason why a dealer will do it is to help to reduce the cost of litigation, not only on their end, but also on the customer end?
That's their rationale. But
Yes.
I know plenty of plaintiff lawyers who will take on a case even if it has an arbitration clause. So what does that tell you?
They're going to pay the arbitration amount and go into court.
Or they're gonna go into arbitration and they're gonna get their fees one way or another, right?
Okay.
Okay.
One way or the other, they're going to get the arbitration. They may or may not go into court.
But they're going to get their fees paid for.
So we've got Stephen Gordon here says, I do not agree with that. Insurance companies seldom win against the customer. Arbitration is for the benefit of companies more than the consumer, and you can't appeal an arbitrational outcome.
Well, it depends on what the arbitration agreement says. You can put in an arbitration agreement that you can appeal it or not, and what the mechanism is. The goal of arbitration is to settle it, and that be the end of it. But it can go on depending on the state law and the and the federal law on this. Insurance companies are scared of juries. I agree, but as a part of buyer's orders, and this is a trick that I figured out early on, both the consumer and the dealer should waive a jury trial. So let's just talk about that for a minute, since Steve brought that up. It's obvious why the dealer would want the consumer to waive the jury trial. From a business, and remember, I'm not a lawyer, I'm a business guy. So, but from a business guy perspective, so that it's mutuality, and you can argue to the judge if they say, well, we want a jury anyway. You say, but Your Honor, we gave up the jury trial also. Right? Now,
right.
When would a dealer ever want a jury trial? Never. Never. But the mutuality gives a good moral argument as to why it should be through. They waived it and we waived it. So there you go. So insurance companies don't like juries. I can tell you plenty of stories about what happens when insurance companies don't resolve claims. And they're bold and they say, we're going to go to trial on this. I've been involved in those. They never end well for a car dealer. Here's an example of a way to irritate a customer. I just bought a new bag because I go through bags a lot because I travel a lot, right? So it was a brand new bag. I'd used it 3 times and the stitching from the backpack started ripping. It actually, one of the straps ripped. It was a $200 suitcase. So I put in a claim with the warranty people. Warranty people said, send it back. I sent it back. Well, in order to send it back, Becky, I had to spend $43 on shipping out of a $200 suitcase. So I said to the customer, I said to the company, I said, what good does that, why does that help me? Why does this, you gave me a defective product and now I'm spending $43 to ship my suitcase back to you. So you'll send me another one when that's 25% of the cost of the suitcase. That's not helpful to me, right? So that's how I feel about arbitration, right? I had to make my deposit for $43 to get my suitcase back. That doesn't make sense.
That's a good analogy. It's a good analogy. It really is. So I know that I've had product delivered to my home, and I'm like, what did I just get myself into? How can I cancel this? And before you cancel this, you got to do this, 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 this. And I'm like, are you kidding me? This is crazy. I shouldn't have to do all this. And that's the same thing with this arbitration agreement. So if a dealer doesn't satisfy, hopefully, the issue with the customer, then the customer goes, okay, arbitration agreement. Well, hell, in order to go ahead and meet the arbitration agreement, I got to spend $2,500 of my own money, whatever that amount is.
And here's another perspective. Think about it this way. I'm not going to go to arbitration. I'm going to go to the local news media. That costs me nothing.
So do you think dealers really care about that today?
I don't think they do at all.
I don't think so either.
There's so
I
much-
think they're just getting so bold. They're like, don't worry about the freaking, who cares?
But you know, the problem is you don't know what will
Just
happen
kidding.
with that story. You don't know who sees it. You don't know if a lawyer sees it. You don't know if a regulator sees it. You don't know that it doesn't go viral because the case is so strange that it's, you know,
I know.
the customer was wrong, you know, that was done wrong, and somebody takes interest in it, and it gets, you know, social media and so forth. You just don't know. So if you're rolling the dice, you're rolling the dice, and that's one risk profile. Is if you want to roll the dice, then sometimes you get what you pay for. I mean,
I just think that some of these dealers have been prone to just, making sure that they have their dots, their T's crossed,
eyes dotted,
I's,
T's
yeah,
crossed.
thanks.
Yeah,
I just
yeah.
lost
I
it there
had,
for a second.
with
But,
my-
they are trying to do that, and they just want to make sure that, you know what, let's do our due diligence here. Let's make sure we've got, we protect ourselves as much as we possibly can. And I can bet you every attorney in this country is telling dealers, make sure you have an arbitration agreement in place.
well, now that's a whole different. Lawyers don't like, generally speaking, and I talk to lawyers all the time, they don't like taking these one-off cases for dealers. And the reason is, this is a very interesting fact that lawyers don't talk about a lot, but the reason is nobody's ever satisfied. The dealers get pissed because they end up spending $50,000 because they're right, 60,000, 80,000, whatever it is. So the lawyers don't like taking those cases because the dealers get pissed at them, and the lawyers know the dealers are going to get upset, and so they try to encourage the dealers to settle. But some just, they want to be right, and I'll show them, and I've got more money than that. I mean, I've heard everything. I had a dealer that I met with within the last 120 days who I said, we need to start a compliance program, and here's why. And he said to me, he went like this. He's like, stop. He said, I'd rather pay the penalties than have a compliance program. I said, okay. That's one way to do things.
See, I think that some dealers think that if in the event you put too many obstacles in front of their people, then it's going to cost them sales. It's going to cost them profits. So how far over the line can I go before I get myself in trouble? And if I get myself in trouble, okay, how much does that trouble actually cost me? It is the cost of doing business, I guess.
And some dealers want to calculate it that way. And that's okay. That's their risk tolerance, right? You say, here are the risks. You could talk about Napleton, right? They just wrote a check for $10 million to the FTC. They got enough. What do they have? 87 stores or whatever it is, and they said, okay, they're gonna take on the risk. If $10 million isn't a lot of money, God bless them.
I don't think that really kind of, I don't really think that bothered them so much of writing, $10 million. Now,
don't
the
know.
thing that I say to, some of these managers that are involved in some of this, now I understand that there was a GM that went rogue on them, but you have to have policies and procedures in place to prevent that from happening, right? I
Right.
mean, this is why we do what we do. This is why we have these compliance programs in place to, vet this stuff from happening, or to assure that, okay, we've trained up on this. You decided to do something different than what we trained. This is our culture. This is our mission. This is who we are and what we are. You made the decision to do something different. That's on you, not on me.
Right.
That one I don't understand why a dealer doesn't understand that, to protect their reputation, protect their name, protect, from having a felony, and that sort of thing. So I don't know that sometimes, those egos just get a little bit too much.
Chapter 8 of the Criminal Sentencing Code, which is if the dealer is brought up on federal charges. Chapter 8 of the code clearly says that one of the criteria that the judge is supposed to use before he sentences that person is whether that business person has a compliance program. That's actually written into the code. So there's yet another reason why to have a compliance program.
Well, I hope that dealers certainly are paying attention to our event tonight. I think that you kind of alerted us to taking a look at that arbitration agreement as to, maybe the reasons why it may or may not benefit a dealer, or, if it's not the dealer, then the consumer, and what we can do to make sure that we understand the arbitration agreement. It isn't just as the way that I know I've disclosed it in the past and said, okay, well, this will give you some sort of relief that, again, we can go to arbitration if we can't satisfy your
Right.
concern. And the reality of it is, let's dig this deeper and figure out what we're really saying to a customer when we say that.
Well, listen, risk mitigation is all about making sure you're making informed choices. So if some of your listeners don't agree with me, I respect that, no problem. But just make sure you're aware of the other side of the argument so you know the business decision that you're making and that it's right for you. If you feel it's right for you, great. I mean, I have an opinion and that's what it is. And I can certainly respect the other perspectives, but I just think it's better to ultimately get the customer in, get the problem fixed, and move on. There are ways to handle it when customers are unreasonable. That's a whole different live talk with Becky. We can do a whole nother hour on that. That's not tonight's topic, but I want to make sure that the folks out there are making an active decision and they're not just using arbitration because that's always the way it's been.
Well, I just think that sometimes just because it's always been that way doesn't necessarily mean it's right. And I think that it's important for adults to go ahead and take a look at some of the forms that we're asking customers to sign, take some ownership here, and just have a better idea as to whether or not something, if this benefits the customer, if it benefits the dealer, and why that is. Just a little bit of critical thinking here, guys. And just don't go ahead and just have customers sign some form and be told, hey, by the way, no brainer. This is going to take care of you and me. See you back here if in the event you have any issues, and we're good to go. That's what I used to say. I mean, always said. Let me tell you what that is and why. And no big deal.
Right.
Well, there is there's a catch to everything. So I think it's important for us to know what our catch is. And Tom, you've always made it clear cut and brought it to our attention. These things, these important things to our attention. So I can't thank you enough tonight. I know you've got to get going as well. And oh, guys, by the way, let me just say this. On my live talk with Becky Chernek, guess what? We're going to 30 minutes. Next live talk next week, we're to 30 minutes, no more hour-long live talks with Becky Chernek. And I still have my F&I tips. That is 15 minutes every Tuesday at 2 p.m. So you guys stay tuned. And again, thank you so much, Tom, for being on tonight. Thank you guys for your feedback. Any last thoughts before we, cut tonight?
If anybody wants to call me, I'm happy to continue this conversation. They can reach out anytime. Glad to get the call.
Well, thank you again, Tom. Thank you for the time that you always have with me. And I know we're going to have a follow-up in the near future. I believe that's September. What did we figure? September 8th? Is that right?
September 8th. September
Yeah,
8th.
that's a lunch. We're going to do a lunch on red flag updates, right?
Right. New safeguard rules.
New safeguard rules. There you go. Okay, the red flag safeguard rules updates with Tom Kline. So stay tuned, dudes. Thank you again. And I'm glad you were able to be here with us tonight. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Have a good night.
Thank you, guys.